within the first few months of me becoming interested in it, made me go, wow, this works, and then, so, the sort of, from there, I used to do, I was DJing it was in a pub in Cambridgeshire, and I said, I've just started, learning hypnosis, and the two guys said, we'll put a show on here on a Sunday night, and the first night, like 20, 30 people showed up. The next Sunday, 50, 60 people. The next, you couldn't, queues around the block. And that's when I thought I need to start playing bigger places. And so, I can go off into the sort of, the overview if you want, or, maybe stick with your questions, Adam. But, that's how I got started.
So, funny enough, I will come in that direction in a moment. But the mind voodoo, the mind voodoo, as your colleague called it, I'm really interested to dive in and where are you at with it? So when people ask you what hypnosis is, how to explain it, how do you explain it? How do you? What's your belief about what makes it effective? What the mechanisms are that are driving hypnosis?
Well, there seems to be three schools of thought. One is it's a special state of mind and body that's different to normal waking consciousness, whatever that is. Then there's that it's all just social compliance, right? It's the authority of the hypnotist, the context, etc. And then there's another school of thought, which is we can't really measure what waking consciousness is or isn't. So, why would we bother trying to explain it? We're interested in output. Right? Now, so the way I look at it is about half of what we do each day is a habit. You don't think, shall I tie my shoelaces or brush my teeth? You just do it, yeah? And so most of those habits that we have support us, opening a door, shaking hands, driving a car, etc. But some of them don't, smoking, overeating, unnecessary anxiety, insomnia, etc., right? And so the great thing is hypnosis is a way of communicating with the unconscious mind. The conscious mind, the mind we actively think with, the unconscious mind, the larger mind, which is driving all the habits. So there's a great way often through deep relaxation and fixation of attention and concentration or visualizing, you can program the unconscious mind. And so in a sense, hypnosis isn't a thing. It's not something you put in a wheelbarrow, but it's very often associated with concentration. Milton Erickson, the most famous hypnotherapist of the last century, said hypnosis is the loss of the multiplicity of the foci of attention. It's typical Milton to turn an explanation into an induction. Focusing on one thing to the exclusion of others, if you're right. But then also, if I say to you, could you pass the salt, and you do, I've made a request and you've modified your behavior to fit my suggestion. So in a sense, the way I look at it, I used to get invited on to talk shows back in the 90s with a lovely man called, Professor Graham Wagstaff. And he was totally of the social compliance school of thought. And he would say, there's no such thing as hypnosis. And then they would turn to me and say, what do you think of that? And I go, yeah, I could go with that, or everything's hypnosis. Hypnosis is another word for thinking, right? And so we're all in hypnosis all day long. You're in your driving trance, your walking trance, your waking trance, your sleeping trance, your whatever kind of trance you want to call it. So I know I'm painting with broad brushstrokes here, but that's the most helpful way I think to view it. When people ask me for a simple metaphor, I go, it's like watching TV. When you watch TV, you forget about the carpet and the curtains, the fact you're sitting in a room, you suspend disbelief, and something romantic happens on the screen and you feel a particular way, something scary happens, you feel differently. And so in a sense, that's what a hypnotist does. Captures your attention, guides it in a particular way, and in essence, what a hypnotherapist does is helps you to be more functional, right? To overcome something that's holding you back or something you don't have control over so that you have more freedom. That's really the job of the hypnotherapist. And very often that's done by imagining a richer life, right? So someone sits down and they go, the question I open with is, what do you want? Right? Because everyone's quick to tell you what they don't want. I don't want to be shy, I don't want to be overweight, I don't want to be single, I don't want to, right? But because you get more of what you focus on in life, I say, yeah, I know what you don't want. What is it you do want? So where are you now? Where would you like to be? And then we figure out how they're going to get there. Because again, as a modern hypnotherapist, I'm not interested in why, right? Leave that to the analysts. I'm interested in how. How do you make yourself anxious before you present in public? How do you make yourself frightened of getting on an airplane, or make yourself want to smoke? And no matter how hard you try consciously, you can't stop yourself because the unconscious wants you to do it. So that's really a sort of, again, a broad brushstrokes overview of my view of what hypnosis is and hypnotherapy, and sort of the gist of how it works.
Part of my preparation for today I've spent some time looking at some of the TV shows.
Oh yes.
Looking at some of the TV shows and looking at some of the stage stuff that you did, the sort of embryonic phases of your career. Was your explanation and understanding the sort of mechanisms that make those effects the same as you just explained here, or do you think there are other things at play with regard to the performance aspects of what you've done?
It's a good question, right? So there are definitely some things in common with a stage hypnotism show and hypnotherapy, but they are definitely different. Now with a stage show, obviously it's about getting people to laugh and an element of wow, right? So the most important hypnotic suggestion in a stage show is the title, because you've either come to be hypnotized or see someone hypnotized, right? And so there's a whole lot of social compliance going on, suggestibility exercise. So people go, how do you just snap your fingers and put them into a trance? I go, it's the 20 minutes that took place before, where I'm building compliance, etc., and people are concentrating so much, so I'm just tipping them over the edge there. Now, there's things like, anchoring. There's asking people to positively hallucinate or negatively hallucinate, to follow a post-hypnotic suggestion. All of these things are elements we use in therapy. But with a stage show, what I tended to do, because I noticed, like, when I started out, it was, again, a lot of people with black shirts buttoned up to the top, and goatee beards, and making poodles out of balloons at the end of a pier. There wasn't really, it was a sort of slightly oldie worldy art, right? And I looked at, and there were some really good operators, but they just took forever to put the people in a trance. It took forever to get to the laughs. So what I decided was invite lots of people up, run a whole load of things, write slightly too fast, and see who could keep up with me, and then send the others back. That was just my approach, right? And then what I would also do is I'm selecting, I want good-looking, like cool dude. I want a lorry driver, I want a housewife, I want a pretty girl, I want a nice demographic cross-section because of the various routines I'm going to do with them. And then, so I'm selecting the people, I'm already thinking, he's going to be strutting around like a ballerina in a minute. She's going to think that I'm Mel Gibson, then, things like that. And so I'm planning in my head, and by the time I've run a load of simple routines and visualizing it with your eyes closed, visualizing with your eyes open, by the time I get to the first half of the show, I've selected my people. In some ways they've selected me, and also I know it's kind of going to run itself at that point. So the real work is at the front end, and then of course I have a template, but the thing is you never quite know what someone's going to come out with, right? So there is that you have to sort of have a sense of spontaneity and a sense of humor yourself in order to do it. So, because it's different to what a magician does. A magician is all about, man, look at this and ha ha, right? That's basically a magic show in a nutshell. Whereas a hypnotism show is different. It's like, oh, well, come on up, and there's a bit of banter, and then bam, somebody's in a trance, and then they're doing, what you do is you say, when you wake up, this music starts, you're going to think you're Elvis Presley. So you're telling the audience the joke, and the audience is in on it, right? And then you wake them up and you go, you're not hypnotized, are you? And Jailhouse Rock starts, and they get up and strut around. So then you have the payoff. And then when the music stops, the bewilderment, again, is the tertiary laugh. And so that's the sort of structure of a hypnotism show. Hypnotherapy, for me, is first of all, I ask what the person wants. And it's about getting rapport. And then finding out what stops them. I build like a little hologram around the person, and I see how it is that they're making themselves frightened before they get on the stage. They're picturing getting up and people judging them, and them drying up and losing their place and looking bad and feeling foolish. And they've rehearsed this over and over again. As my friend Richard Bandler says, disappointment requires adequate planning. And so when I find out that that's what they're doing, I go and change the movie, right? So very often it's about mapping what somebody does in order to hold themselves back or stop them or whatever it is. And then installing a new strategy through visualization, through metaphor, through sometimes just direct suggestion. You know, I'm very much of the Ericksonian kind of indirect hypnotherapist, but there is a time and place to just tell somebody, do this, you know, and be direct like an old-fashioned authoritarian hypnotist. And so the great thing about hypnotherapy is that, you know, once upon a time, it was just very much come in, sit down, close your eyes, do as you're told, right? Now, you know, we're interested, it's much more sophisticated. There, you know, people have studied language patterns, you know, so you presuppose how, you know, things are going to work, it's going to be easy, you make those assumptions. Then, as well as that, you have different kinds of induction. I use metaphor a lot, you know, even before we've begun the formal induction. You know, I love the Milton Erickson, my friend John. So someone would sit down and they go, I've got this problem, Dr. Erickson. You say, that reminds me of my friend John, who had exactly the same problem, and this is how he overcame it. Now, John had more experiences than it's possible for human beings to have, right? Because as a hypnotherapist, you're allowed to make it up, provided your intent is pure and you want to help the other person, right? So I use, you know, a lot of metaphor, but then also, what's also adjoining hypnotherapy these days are these fabulous psychosensory techniques. There's EMDR, there's TFT, which I really like, EFT as well, which works. My favorite is the Havening technique, the psychosensory technique. And so, you know, if you look at it, I don't know, here's a good example, right? If you had a mobile phone back in the 80s, do you remember them like a brick, right? And all you could do was make phone calls on it. Whereas nowadays, a mobile phone is like the size of a bar of chocolate, but I can have my office on here, World Communications, access to all the information that's on the internet. I can video conference, I can have my music, I can literally have my life on this thing. Now, in the same way, psych tech, right, if you like, has in the last 50 years come on leaps and bounds. I mean, you know, it used to take months to cure a phobia back in the 80s or 70s. Now, most phobias are, you know, one session, I find. And that's because we understand the nature, the structure of how, you know, someone's become phobic. You're not born phobic, right? The only two fears you're born with are hardwired as sudden loud noises and falling. All the others have been learned. So if they've been learned, they can be unlearned, right? And so, you know, nowadays we've made all these, you know, various brilliant researchers and psychological designers have created techniques, technologies, if you like, that many of us can benefit from.
Yeah, thank you. I want to pull back to the stage a little bit.
Sure.
When we spoke briefly in the week, I told you about the show that I've been watching, where you were wearing a suit.
Yes.
That had your hand, a fake arm in the pocket.
Yes.
And you coming out, you had a red arm. Your actual arm was red.
Yes.
And you gave the guy, the volunteer, a suggestion that the colour red was invisible to him.
Yeah.
And he had a red checked shirt on, and you said, and nice shirt, by the way.
Yeah.
And so you said, you know, there's going to be a force field coming up, and you held your arm out, and he was not seeing it, and he was reacting amazing, and you walked across this like red carpeted table,
yeah,
and he's looking at you like, yeah, you are walking on water.
Sure.
Yeah. And that was so creative, and the show and the hypnotic effects that you did in that, it was so creative. Does something stand out for you? Have you got some favourite memories, some favourite reactions, or a favourite skit of some kind from those?
Do you know, there's no two shows are ever the same, and I used to tour the country doing about 200 shows a year, and there would always be something. I'm trying to think. There's so many. Do you know, somebody came up to me the other day on a train, and they went, "I forgot I did this one." They said, "Oh, you know, you got me back in the 90s," and you said you sent me out during the interval. And you said, you're a telephone answering machine. And everyone who came up to me went, sorry, Brian's not here right now, but leave a message after tone, beep, and then they walk off. I remember once, I used to tell somebody that a broom was their favourite supermodel. And this was up in the north side. His bloke was going, it's Cameron Diaz, oh my God. And he started, he walked off into the wings. And I said, where are you going? He goes, I'm going to show Cameron the beast. You know, and it was, so you would get things like that. Or, I'm trying to think, there was a guy, there would be like, I would send, the interval was quite interesting because I would send somebody out with a megaphone and they think they were directing a movie. And again, you couldn't, this is the thing, right? I took my show to Broadway and there was a friend of mine who did one of the talk shows and he brought his writers down, right, to see the show. And they all said, this is bullshit, these are all actors, I don't believe any of this stuff. And he said, no, it's not, he's my friend, you know, I know it's all legit. And they said, but you can't just get people off the street to be that funny, right? And I said, yeah, see, that for me is part of what the magic of stage hypnotism is, that somebody who's a shy bank clerk comes on the stage, you take away their inhibitions, and you give them permission to be really funny, right? Because see, not everyone tells jokes well, but everyone's got a sense of humor, I think, more or less everyone. And so with karaoke, you would use, you know, a few drinks to lower inhibitions, to get up and then murder, I will survive, or something like that. Whereas with a hypnotism show, you're actually, because again, all the indirect suggestions I'm giving at the start are about creativity, right? I'm talking, I made up, it's really bad. Einstein never said this, but he said, you know, we use something like 10% of our brain's potential, you know, with hypnosis we get access to the other 90%, right? It's just something I made up, what you didn't say. But indirectly, I'm saying to people, get access to your creative abilities. So one of the things that I liked about, what's interesting about the red arm thing, I do remember this, was I'm getting a negative hallucination going there. And you see when people go, well, how do they negatively hallucinate? Look, everyone's had the experience of, they're looking for their car keys, and they're right, but I can't see them, because your mind is moving everywhere where they're not. And I think it was Dave Ellman did an experiment where he put a chair in the middle of the room, he hypnotized some subjects, and he told them that the chair was invisible. And they walked across the room, they should have walked into the chair, but all of them walked around the chair. And then afterwards he said, why did you walk around the chair? And they said, what chair? Right? So to me, there are so many standout moments, you know, from over the years. It's a long time ago. You know, I did it during the 90s, and it was great, and I had a terrific time. And then, you know, I decided I wanted really, because by then I was doing hypnotherapy and you know, motivational sorts of things, and I decided I couldn't continue to be clinician. I couldn't be a clinician if I was getting people to do daft things. And also, I wanted to finish on top. I sort of had a good run of it, and I thought, that's great. You know, I've had a really good fun time doing it, and it's time to move on to something new now.
And born out of that time, people having seen these effects coming to you clinically, are they then expected, that there are expectations of maybe born out of having seen you perform and create these amazing effects. And one of the things I mentioned briefly when we were speaking earlier, you know, when we're working with people, we are Adonesian hypnotherapists. You are Paul McKenna, and so the reputation, the expectation, the things that people have seen, has a potential to influence and grow the response and so on. And I wondered what you thought about that and what other people's expectations were and whether that was pressure for you or whether that actually made things easier for you.
Well, that's a really interesting question, because when I started out 40 years ago, you know, it was hypnosis was voodoo. People would say two things. They'd say it's dangerous or it doesn't exist. And I'd say, well, it can't be both, you know. And you know, if you look at the research, the overwhelming thing is it's completely safe and it works. It doesn't work for everything every time, but it works for a lot of things, certainly behavioral changes most of the time. Certainly, you know, my experience of that and looking at the research. So yes, at the beginning, there was, people would say, the usual misconceptions. Is it a truth drug? Am I going to blurt out things I don't want to? Will I lose control? Will I never wake up? You know, will all this kind of stuff, you know. And, you know, so I would just pre-frame that and say, well, some people are worried about this, this, and this, and of course none of it's true, right? Nowadays, it's different. Hypnosis and hypnotherapy is in the mainstream, right? And it's very, you know, much accepted 40 years later as a really good therapy for the traditional things of quitting smoking, losing weight, insomnia, anxiety, phobias. Every major sports star in the world has somebody like us now work with them. They might call themselves a sports psychologist or success coach, but basically they're doing hypnosis and NLP. And if you look at the world of athletics, the difference between a medal and an also-ran is less than 1%. So anything that gives them the edge is really important to them. So coming back to sort of the origins to your question, which was, this is what I think it implies, does it give me greater success because of reputation, authority, credibility? Yes. People, but then also...
Is that hard to live up to?
Yes, that's my next point, which is then the pressure's on because they're expecting a miracle, right? I'm just going to snap my fingers and everything's going to be okay. And sometimes it isn't that simple. I mean, look, years ago, I remember coming out of the theatre that night. I just finished a show, and we'd had a few drinks backstage, and there was a lady waiting for me, and she said, I know you can make me quit smoking. And I said, well, she said, no, I know if you tell me. It's good. I said, she's offering it to me, right? If you tell me, I went, no, I wouldn't normally do this, right? And it's a bit naughty to even admit this. I went, I said, you will never smoke again. And then she wrote to me, and about 6 months later, she said, I haven't touched a cigarette. And I knew it was because you told me. And I thought, okay, so there is a time and a place to use authority, to use your credibility, your brand, etc. But sometimes somebody at one of my events, I'll ask for a simple thing, like somebody's had a trauma or a car accident or a bad habit or something they want to turn around, self-sabotage. And they'll come up and they'll go, well, the abuse started when I was X years old, right? So I then have to then go clean that up because I can say, look, this is not the appropriate time or space. But sometimes they'll offer me something and I go, look, I think I can do it. Or something doesn't work first time, so I try something else. And I try something else, and I try something else, and I try something else. Now, two characteristics that I think are really important as any therapist is curiosity, right? Because that keeps you interested, and tenacity. I remember once watching Richard Bandler with this lady this didn't work, that, and he kept going in. And in the end, he said, ma'am, you're going to get better, or one of us is going to die trying. Very Richard, And so I think that just, because also they'll see it in your eye, right? If they know that there is not a chance on this earth that you're going to give up, you are just going to keep going, and you don't care, right? Somehow the person subconsciously you're working with picks up upon that, and their unconscious goes, okay, all right, See, Milton Erickson said, there's no such thing as a resistant client. There's only an inflexible therapist. Now, when I read that, I was like, damn. So I can't blame it on anyone else, right? And what that does is that puts the responsibility upon you. And, there are times, of course, that there was, when it can be frustrating. There was a guy who came to see me about 10 years ago, and he had a terrible stutter. And there and then, in my room, I cured him, he stopped stuttering. So I thought, he goes back out into the world and damn, the thing comes back. And so he rings me up. I said, well, come back, right? And we come back again. That's it, it's all gone, it's all fine, right? And then he goes back and it comes back again. And he phones back, I said, right, come back again, right? And he went, well, I don't know really. I mean, it hasn't worked. I said, of course it's worked. I sat and had a conversation with you stutter-free twice now. He went, it's not for me. And I thought, oh, okay, right? I wasn't able to convince him to come back and do it again. Whereas I could think there was one guy for quitting smoking. This guy was a really high-powered media kind of guy. And as we know, smoking is a very effective stress control mechanism. It just has a massive negative long-term health consequence for a lot of people. So, first of all, I got him to stop for a week. And then it was like 2, and it took, so eventually he stopped and he quit, but it was 5 goes at it. And my take is, if you're relentless, firstly, you'll get there with nearly everyone.
Yeah.
But as Roger Callahan, he was the creator of TFT, a beautiful man, he said to me, anyone who says they got a 100% success rate doesn't have enough clients. And I thought, okay, I suppose that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah. You mentioned sports stars having mental coaches and so on. I know you worked with. I wrote a response article about you having worked with Nigel Benn, and I remember at the time, members of the public and some of his competition were saying it wasn't fair. It was like he'd been caught taking steroids, because he was receiving help from you.
Yeah.
And I'm interested, as far as you're concerned, what are some of the more pervasive misconceptions about hypnosis that still persist out there and that you encounter?
Well, with Nigel Benn, and this is all in his autobiography, it's in the public domain, so I can talk about it. He came to see me because he'd gone through breakup of his marriage, and he couldn't focus on anything. And he was not in a great place emotionally. And all I did was help him get focused again, right? Now, what happened was because I'd been asked, by boxers, will you help me? Because you can increase strength and stamina and speed. You get people to go into slow time, so they're in a combat sport. They're, just like a racing driver gets in a car, they go into slow time. Jackie Stewart said, I only ever drove fast twice in my life, and both times it scared me. So with Nigel, but unfortunately, because of the way that fight ended, the next day all the headlines are hypnotized to be a robo-assassin and things like this, which makes great, sort of tabloid cover. And then, oh my God, I had to go on TV and defend it all. And I remember I was with some bloke from the Boxing Federation and so on, and we were all being tortured by this, the interview. And there was a lady I forget where she was from. She went, "We should ban the dangerous sports." And this guy from the Boxing Federation went, "The dangerous ones, huh?" And she went, "Oh yes, the dangerous ones." Now it turns out boxing's like number 25 or 30 is dangerous. Fishing's number 1, which I was amazed to learn. But again, there was this misconception that it had, as you say, it was some sort of form of cheating. Now, I don't think so, because I think if you're trying to get somebody to be the best version of themselves, be it in sports or anywhere, that's a really good thing, right? And you'll know with sports people, they all crave the flow, the zone, they call it the zone, right? When they're in this peak state of performance, right? So they've trained for years to be at the Olympics. And they walk out, there's a billion people watching them on TV. Suddenly there's pressure, right? So what if you get them to go into that peak state no matter what? That's the difference that makes the difference, right? And so a lot of the misconceptions that were around when I started in the 80s, a lot of those have been dispelled now. It's not seen as some mind control. In fact, it's giving you more control over your own mind, right?
Yeah.
And it's not seen as truth drug. It's not seen as malevolent. But if you stop to think about it, when I'm asked about people who misuse hypnosis, I say, well, do you mean, for example, politicians? Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama are all trained in NLP. They're very eloquent with their language patterns. So forget the actual political content, that they're just skilled operators. What about salespeople? Most salespeople have taken some hypnosis or NLP training these days, create rapport, to try and find what it is you need so they can sell you the benefits of what they have. When people say to me, who are the best hypnotists, I say parents. All those things that are said to you up until the age, things like, particularly from an authority figure, we're at a moment of emotional intensity, go in with the power of hypnotic suggestion. One of my favorite stories is there was a guy who came to see me. This is early on in the 80s. And he had self-sabotage issues, right? Every time he started to get successful, he'd screwed up, and he knew he was doing it, but he couldn't consciously stop himself. And back in those days, I was very much old school. I wouldn't do it like this now, but I just stuck him into a trance, and I regressed him and said, go to the time when this first happened. And he was a little kid, and he went, when I grow up, Mum, I want to be successful. And she said, ooh, son, you don't want to do that. Those successful people, they have heart attacks, right? Now, the unconscious, as we know, is not logical, it's purposeful, and its purpose is survival, right? So, bam, authority figure says, successful people have heart attack, straight to the unconscious. years later, he's trying consciously to be successful. His unconscious guy, I don't think so, right? And holding him back. So I think, that again, a lot of positive things get said to you as a kid, but why is the fear of public speaking the largest phobia? Stand up in front of the class, read out loud, somebody points out your mistakes, people sneer. That's where it gets installed. Yeah. So, I hope that answers the question. I think I went, through a few loops there to get there, but hopefully it does.
And over the years, you've worked with some exceptionally high-profile people.
Mm-hmm.
I watched the TV appearance you did on the Ellen show.
Yes.
And helped Ellen DeGeneres stop smoking, and she still swears by it. I've seen follow-up interviews where she swears by it. And you did. I don't know if there was other things happening in the lead up or something, but you did an aversion technique. Part of what you did was an aversion technique.
Yeah.
And I'd be really interested to know, what dominates your clinical work. Is aversion still something you continue to do? You mentioned some of the more modern interventions earlier. I think I would be really interested. I think everybody here would be really interested to know the kind of things that tend to dominate your clinical work, the kind of, if you have things that stand out, that you feel really comfortable and familiar with, have preferences towards.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a big answer, right? My background is Ericksonian hypnosis, obviously loads of NLP, because Richard Bandler was my most important teacher. And I learn from everybody. If I can, if somebody can do something I can't, I would be like, right, I want to model this. How is it? What's the sequence? What's the strategy? Now, the technique I used with Ellen was it's called we call it a threshold. And basically, with smokers, what happens is they have they hear of somebody who's got a health problem, or they think, oh, I got to stop, my clothes smell like an ashtray or something. But when these things are spaced out, it doesn't have any impact, right? But when you stack them really close together, and so I got Ellen to think of the 4 times that she thought, I gotta quit, right? And then amplify it, make the pitch bigger and brighter, and overlap it into the second and the third and the fourth. What happens is this massive negative experience happens in relation to cigarettes that doesn't when they're spaced out. And so suddenly it's like the last straw that breaks the camel's back. And suddenly you then go, now think about having a cigarette. Well, they go, and you've collapsed the anchors. Now, you could use that same technique in love pain, right? Somebody is addicted to things, they can't get over somebody, right? Then you get them to think of the 4 times where they thought, I really don't like this person anymore. And you slam them hard together, this technique came from, what happened was a friend of Richard Bandler's had a halfway house for women. And some of them, they'd get beaten up and then they'd decide to go back, right? But the ones who never went back, ones that had several negative experiences in close succession. So he said, oh, I see, there's a threshold in the brain. And so things that I treat, obviously weight loss, well, I put on a few pounds recently. I'm gonna have to read one of my own books, I think. And then I really, obviously things like insomnia, phobias, anxiety right now is big. The world has never needed hypnotherapy and the techniques that we do more than it does right now. If you just look at the evidence on the anxiety, and everyone I talk to who's a therapist says, yeah, if it isn't anxiety top of the list, it'll be something related to insomnia because of anxiety, etc. And so we've come out of a biological pandemic, we're in a psychological pandemic. Turn on the TV right now, or open a newspaper, or turn on the radio, you're under attack! It's the war, it's the virus, it's the economy, it's something, right? And so people have gotten good at catastrophizing. So the area that I've been the last 10 years, although I've just formally retired from one-to-one therapy, I did 40 years of it. I never charged anybody a penny. I asked everyone I worked with to give a donation to charity, because life had been good to me. Yeah, my career as an author and broadcaster and now a trainer, has been successful. So it was my way of giving something.
Why did I not know this?
Well, it's not something it does sound like I'm boasting, and so, but I think it's worth mentioning now I've retired from it. But the last 10 years at the sharp end, PTSD. So I worked quite a bit with war veterans, rape victims, bereavement cases, There was a fascinating study we did at King's College with Professor Neil Greenberg with the Havening technique.
Yeah.
But, and it was originally a classified study, but it got declassified. And obviously I don't just do pure Havening. By the way, the Havening technique, who knows what about the Havening technique here? Oh, right, so most of you do. Yeah, I mean, I find it, I think all the psychosensories are great. For me, I really like this because it was my friend, Dr. Ronald Rudin, who invented it. And it's kind of an interesting story, actually. I went, this was years ago, about 25 years ago, I went and had it was a friend of mine said, oh, there's a psychic in our village who's great. And I thought, okay, so I went to this lady and she pulled this book off the shelf called Tapping the Healer Within. And she went, this is for you. And I went, well, thank you. She went, no, you don't understand. You're going to work with this man. This is important. And I looked at this and I thought, I've spent years learning hypnosis and NLP, and apparently all you do is go, and you feel that hypnosis is very rubbish, isn't it? Anyway, I was sitting the next day on a flight to New York, and the person I'm traveling with, she said, Sean, I'm really craving some chocolate. And I said, I just turned the page on cravings. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, she went, 10. I said, try this, tap here, tap here. So she went, it's gone. I went, brilliant. I saw the lady over here, she was like flying like this. So I said, excuse me, madam, you're a nervous flyer. Let me help. I said, try this. She went, oh, I feel so calm. Anyway, I did a couple more people, only in first class. I didn't go back to them. Awful back then. Anyway, so anyway, when I got to New York, I'm walking down Broadway with Ronnie Rudin. I said, Ronnie, I read the goddamn weirdest book on the plane. He said, really? And I said, yeah, it was this big tapping thing, and I have no idea why it works out. I now understand it because I got introduced to Roger Callahan, and we became friends. And it's based on the Chinese medicine model, which is energy flow, meridians, and stagnation being the enemy, right? So the reason you call it thought field therapy because when you have say a compulsion or fear or something like that, you have a particular sequence of thoughts, and the energy flows in a particular way. The tapping on the meridian points makes it move, right? So that's an Eastern way. Now Ron Rudin, he's an MD, but he's a Harvard PhD in neuropharmacology. So he went, I just don't see why this works, but I'm going to research why touch might. And what's really interesting is the touch of here, 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 and here produces a massive delta wave. So when you go through trauma, 100 hertz wave travels from the thalamus and phosphorylates what's called the AMPA receptors. So when you summon it, you think of the traumatic thing and you're doing this, you're flooding the brain with delta, it dephosphorylates it, it delinks the thought from the feeling. There's a brilliant 20-minute video on YouTube explaining the science of this, because Havening community are all science medical, right? It's not a sort of, self-help rah-rah thing, right? Anyway, so I spent the last 10 years doing that, and I have to say, I found it, you've got to be the right friend of mine for that sort of work. You've got to be match fit, because, the people you're dealing with, they're suicidal, they're depressed, they've given up, they've tried everything, nothing's worked, and you're their last hope. So, you've really got to come to the table. And this is the way I look at it, is if you're a right-thinking person, when you do something that's helpful or kind, it feels good, right? It feels nice, doesn't it? Opening a door for somebody, but particularly when you free somebody from the prison of their own PTSD, right? It's like a miracle's happened to them. And it feels so good, right? It's a good job being a hypnotherapist. It pays well, but it pays emotionally very well. So the only people, obviously, who don't feel like that are sociopaths and psychopaths, because it's all about them, isn't it? So, but when you do something to help somebody else, and you're right thinking, it feels really good. And for me, that was a large part of what drove me, particularly in the last 10 years. And because I thought, I was part of the team that Ronnie had helped him develop this and took it into, we did it for the British military, we did stuff for the Americans, and it was amazing, right? Because the first few times I demonstrated it, and you could see the military psychiatrist going, some Johnny from the television, nonsense, stroke your arms here. And then, of course, when we saw the results of the first study, and then the subsequent ones, and it stuck, right? These people were transformed. Not everyone, but nearly everyone, nearly every time. This was something that was amazing. So for me, even though my commercial ventures have been successful, I mean, I think you need a purpose, in life.
Yeah.
And, Viktor Frankl, wrote Man's Search for Meaning, said, purpose is the cornerstone of good mental health. And like a purpose can be a small thing like today, it's going to try and be a nice person, I'm going to try and be a good husband, or it could be, I'm going to try and help as many people as I can. And, in recent years, what I do now, which the job I have now, which is, I love it, is I'm in business with Mind Valley, who are the biggest online self-improvement company. They have 20 million followers. And when I met Vishnu Nakiani, who's the founder, I was like, what's your goal? And he said, to touch 1 billion souls. And I went, wow. And he said, look, I think we could do something, because online training is now a big thing. So we train about 1,000 people a year in hypnotherapy, not in the really heavy stuff, OCD, depression, PTSD, but the main things people go to see a hypnotherapist for: quitting smoking, losing weight, anxiety, etc. And a lot of people these days want to learn online, right? And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic thinking, oh my God, I've got to do all this by Zoom. And my friend Michael Neal, he's a brilliant life coach, and he said, hey, no, you're thinking of it wrong, man. Think of it like television. And the person comes up on the screen and you connect with them. Now, it's better, I think, in person, but the way the world's going is it's digital, and people want to do stuff online, and they don't want the expense and the inconvenience of traveling. And so that way we can get to more people and create. My thinking is, if I teach people hypnotherapy and they're reasonably good, they're going to then help people, and those other people will be better, and it ripples out throughout the world. So then I know I've gone a bit off piece there, but that's
that's interesting. That kind of leads me in the direction that I was going to ask next anyway, which is, as a field, we're fringes. We're fringes. We have flag bearers such as yourself, but how does the field reach more people? What do you think is needed in order to raise awareness, and make it more common, conventional?
Yeah. Well, this is again another cracking question, because when I look at, Einstein said, if you want to know the future, look at the past. If you look at the last 50 years and what we're now able to do in terms of psychological technology, things we can cure or significantly treat that we couldn't even get close to before, right? If that trajectory continues, hypnotherapy, NLP, psychosensory therapies are going to be everywhere. And I just did a couple of years ago, I did a demonstration at the Royal College of Medicine, I think it is, and this brilliant guy, Michael Dixon, he's the King's Doctor, right? And he kicks it off and says, we've got to embrace, medicine has to embrace alternative therapies, right? It's the future, it's of course, if I've got a broken leg, I want to go see a doctor, right? But if I have a phobia, a hypnotherapist is the right person. Now, arguably there's crossover because, some of my friends who are doctors, they say if somebody comes in to them and they're feeling down, they have 15 minutes, so they give them an antidepressant, right? And I'm not qualified to dispute whether that's a good thing or not, but certainly it helps people. Quarter of the country right now is on psychiatric medication, a large proportion of that are SSRIs. I'm more interested, say, as a hypnotherapist, in how they're doing their depression. Now, clearly some of that could be neurochemical, but also people's perspectives can lead them to continually playing all the worst things, etc. And so, when I was doing the PTSD stuff, a lot of the people were depressed as well. And again, I had great results because I'm not just looking to treat the symptom with a tablet, I'm going to the cause by working with them. And so what I see, if we're looking at the future where this is going, it's going to become even more mainstream. Wouldn't it be great if at school you learned mind mapping? Tony Bazan's, he was a lovely man, Tony Bazan. Mind mapping, would revolutionize our education system. Wouldn't it be great if you also had self-esteem classes? Or if you had, you learned basic kind of NLP at school. And, people say, but what about persuasion influence? I say, yes, because then it's harder for unscrupulous people to manipulate you. If you know the language patterns and the various techniques that people use in compliance, that politicians and salespeople use or misuse, then you're less likely to be susceptible to them. So the way I see this going, based on the last 50 years, we're going to have more techniques that are going to be more useful, more people doing it, because now, if I look online now, there's hypnotherapy training courses everywhere, which is a good thing, right? Because more people can learn to do it, and it's a great profession. The average hypnotherapist earns, I think it's something like $100,000 a year, like £70,000 a year, something like that, the average one. And as I say, it's not just a comfortable living, it's the emotionally such a great living. What a fantastic job. It just strikes me that we're just going to see loads of this everywhere, available, very reasonably priced. So I have a partner, and I have an app, right? I'm a partner in the business, and he's just created an AI version of me, right? And so, it's great. And at first I was like, oh my God, because I goes, hello, I'm Paul McKenna, how can I help you? And I would just make stuff up, and it was exactly what I would say in response, right? Because we fed all load of my stuff into it. And so what we're going to see is AI everywhere. So you will have AI therapy, you'll have AI diagnosis, you'll have AI accountancy, legal advice, all sorts of stuff. AI is going to transform the world in many ways positively. There's potential negatives as well. We're also going to see that in the world of hypnotherapy.
And are you a good hypnotic subject?
Oh, I'm great. And a lot of hypnotists are actually great subjects. Yeah. And if somebody, like one of my friends invents something, any of us, we ring up everyone, guess what I can do, right? And so I'm always like really up for trying anything out, but also I use my own trances, and people say, isn't that weird? I go, what, hearing my own voice in my own head? No, it's fantastic. So instead of going, oh, what are we going to do about this or that? It's like, now it's all going to be fine. And so, I relax. I had some acupuncture. It was great. He put the needles in, I put the thing on, and there's this trance I made a couple of years ago called Freedom from Anxiety. But it's not just that. It's a 38-minute trance, right? But it's like putting everything about, just positively, your positive perspective on the world, your perceptual filters. And after 38 minutes of that, I woke up feeling fantastic. So yeah, I'm a great subject. In a way, everyone is a good subject, but the variables are the operator, the context, and the issue. And so, if you've got enough flexibility in your communication, the law of requisite variety, I like this. It states that the part of a system that has the most flexibility always ends up in control of the system, right? So that's a family, a corporation, or a political party, right? So if someone's got 8 ways of resisting you, you need 9 ways of convincing them, yeah? So if you're prepared to adapt, and just recently we've all had to adapt in the last 5, 10, certainly it's the last 5, 6 years, it's the pandemic. If you're prepared to adapt, you are more powerful, right? And so I think it's way more than just being a therapist. It's about your skills in life generally. I think adaptive creative thinking is a really important part of being successful.
Yeah, you did that. You did a TV show where you were working with people.
Yes.
And doing your clinical work with people.
Yeah.
And there were some incredible results. Is there something, and working with some of the standout people that you have, is there something that stands out in terms of, wow, like a couple of like, wow, a human did that, or wow, that happened?
Yeah, there's one. The show is called I Can Change Your Life.
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen it in years, and we put, it was a few years ago, we put all my hypnotism show, well, many of them, some of them had copyright issues, so they had seen it, but we put the I Can Change Your Life series up on my YouTube channel. And there's one case, right, if I had to say, there's loads, but I'm very fond of, pleased with. There was a guy called Ray Mash, and he was working on a construction site, and he hit his head, and he went blind, hysterical blindness, right? And it's a very rare condition. Adolf Hitler had it, actually. It lasted about 6 months. Anyway, Ray hadn't seen anything in 8 years. And he wrote to me, and I went, oh my God, So they can't find a physiological, biological reason for this blindness. And he was told, that's it, you're blind, off you go. And I thought, I mean, it's such a rare case. So I said, yeah, I'd love to work with you. And he had the dark glasses, he had, serious light sensitivity issues. So we had to work in the dark to begin with. And I was just trying every damn thing I could, right? And I was beginning to get little breaks. I got him to take the glasses off and lose the identity of being a blind person. And because you see, the brain is plastic. So if one part, with a child, the whole hemisphere can get knocked out and the other hemisphere will take over, right? So I was thinking, I just tried everything, right? And I started to get little breakthroughs. He went, hang on, because there was a window there. And even though the room was darkened, it was like a little crack in the curtains. He went, I can see the light over there. And this continued over months. And there was one point where one day he was starting to get vague images, and I held a light underneath his wife's face. He went, oh my God, I can see my wife's face. First time, like goosebumps,
Wow, yeah.
And then his sight, he hasn't returned entirely, but he could see his wife's face, he could see his grandchildren. I spoke to him a couple of years ago, and he'd driven a car, not on the road, but he'd driven a car, and basically he's got his sight back to some degree. Now, then on the program, it was a psychiatrist who looked at it and said, no, I think there was actual neurological damage, and the brain being plastic, somehow, what Paul McKenna has done has helped him to rebuild his vision. So we kind of don't know exactly, but again, it comes back to Adam, curious and relentless. Yeah. And so for me, that was like one of the standout kind of bordering on miracle cases.
Anybody that goes and watches that, I think they'll see the relationship that you have with these people as well, and how much they believe in you, and those kind of things, and it's beautiful to watch.
Thank you.
So I put a thread on our Facebook group asking for questions.
Mm-hmm.
After I deleted a whole bunch of
them,
there are a couple of quirky ones left.
Yeah, usually.
If you could hypnotize anyone from history, who would it be? Why would you do anything quirky?
Well, I brought up Hitler a minute ago, didn't I? Hypnotize him, do something different. I suppose the thing is, right, if you interfere with history, you see it in all the like Back to the Future. You don't know then the cause and effect that you create. So there's a part of me, like, if you say, is there anyone would you like to have met? Obviously, it would be someone like the Buddha, or Einstein, or Charlie Chaplin, or some sort of like really incredible person like that. But actually hypnotize them. There's nobody. I think I've pretty much met everyone I wanted to. It's been this is one of the things. When I sat down, I was working as a DJ by day at Capital Radio in the 80s, and hypnotist by night. I was doing army bases, student union things, right? And I just I did this process. There's a great question the American motivational speakers have, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail, right? And I went, well, if I couldn't fail, takes the limiters off. Right, I'd be on television, be doing my comedy show on television. I'd make, in those days it was cassettes, and I'd also work with people from, people from the arts, sports, business, leaders, and I get to meet all these really cool people. And then I asked, well, what would stop me? What do I have to do? Who do I have to become? I'd have to educate myself about things. I'd have to be prepared to take certain risks. And I was walking down Tottenham Court Road, and I had an epiphany. And I suddenly went, Capital Radio owns a theatre. I make the promos saying, see Pink Floyd in concert. And I went to the then big boss, Richard Palm, and I said, Richard, I do this hypnotism show, and he goes, yes, I've heard Paul. And I said, I don't know if it's possible if I could get a deal on hiring the theatre and maybe promote it on the radio station, do a hypnotism show. And he sat back in his chair and he went, I'll back you. And you see, I think all success in life comes down to people backing you. If you're, I don't know, a shopkeeper, your customers back you by buying from you. If you're a politician, your voters back you, etc. Right? You're a hypnotherapist, your clients back you. And in that moment, everything changed because he backed me, and the promo got rather a lot more plays than it should have, because some of the other DJs are my mates. So the first week, the theatre was about half full, and I thought, oh my God, because I borrowed a year's wages from the bank, right? And this is a big old gamble, but risk is the currency of the gods. And the next week it was 3/4 full, and the next week, bam, it was sold out. And I thought, God, this is amazing. And then big promoter came to see me, Harvey Goldsmith, and then a TV producer who called Smith, and he said to me, he goes, I've been looking for you for 10 years. And I said, well, what do you mean? He went, well, I've wanted to do a hypnotism show, but all the people I've looked at aren't really TV suitable, and I think you would work on television. I said, let's make whatever we do. We made a pilot. Then we had a big hit. It was the most viewed entertainment show, I think, of 1993.
Yeah.
And I spent, basically the 80s I was a DJ, 90s I was a stage hypnotist. The noughties, I'd become much more of a trainer and an author. And what happened was I wrote a book called Change Your Life in 7 Days, right? And I basically, I'd been reading lots of self-help books, and I thought a lot of people were rehashing stuff. And this is my take on it, right? And I thought, wouldn't it be great if it got onto the bestseller list? And not only did it get on there, it kept creeping up, and bam, it smashed it #1, and it smashed all the way around the world. And then the publisher said, come in. And they went, you're not going anywhere. We want a lot more of these from you. And so then I've spent the last sort of 25 years or so writing. I looked at Change Your Life about a year ago. I hadn't read it in 20 years. And I went, most of this is great, but I would update. And the publisher said, do you feel like updating? I said, yes. So I just updated it. And I put some new things in, bonus chapter. I put in spirituality, which was missing in those days. I was very much all about ambition. I was just about clinician. There wasn't really any spirituality in what I did, and there is more nowadays.
Well, that leads me to my final question. What next? What's next for Paul McKenna? What happens? You mentioned you're retiring from your one-to-one work.
Yeah.
What happens now?
Okay, so right now, with Mind Valley, we have this huge hypnotherapy training organization. And that I just love doing that. I love turning on the camera, the lights, doing the live Q&A. I like doing live events still. I like doing things like this. But that's a big focus for me. The app that we've made, is again taking digital technology. So when I started making cassettes back in first ones were in the late 80s, but more so in the 90s, because I come from a radio production background, I thought, hang on a minute, rather than just be one voice, why don't I do messages for the left and the right brain? Process instructions for the left brain, metaphor for the right brain. I can communicate with the whole brain, right? And so and everyone said to me at the time, these trances are a bit psychedelic, all the messages going on. And I went, well, yeah, but I think that's going to be, the future. It's a better standard. And so what I see is, in the future for me, the marriage more of digital technology. So, what Mind Valley do is we take a book and we chop it into 21 or 30 9-minute lessons. And so, because people consume it on their phone, people's attention spans changed, particularly with young people. They want it all, instead of, back in like the 80s, when I started, there were books, and there were a handful of Milton, videos, and a couple of audios of Richard Banner and John Grinner, and that was it. Really. I mean, there was you could go and meet hypnotherapists and talk to them and ask them or watch what they did, but we weren't able. It was a much harder job to learn. Nowadays, it's much easier to get really great learning experience online, and you could just ask AI or Google it. Explain this to me, and it will do in 10 minutes, or it will do over an hour, depending upon how you want to consume it. And so, for me, I think I'm moving more into that realm. I'm never retiring, right? But I've got some things, some really nice things planned. People I'm going to work with, events. I still like doing an event in a room with people. but online is, and an Apple recorded production is definitely where the sort of future's going. And I think it's probably a really interesting time to be alive. It's interesting that the Chinese call this time Wei Qi, right? It's two characters: danger, opportunity. And I'm a pretty optimistic guy, right? And so I tend to think it's going to be okay. It doesn't mean there ain't going to be problems, of course there is. But I think overall, we're in an exciting time right now where people have never been more open to the job that we do as hypnotherapists. They've never been more in need of it as well. So as I sort of mentioned, so I just see myself doing more of this and adapting to the technology and the way that people want to. So I'm a content maker essentially in a clinician. So how do I adapt what I do to make it much more available to as many people as possible, and so that they can. This is the great thing now with my AI element on the phone. You just hit a button, and I'll pop out and go, yeah, how can I help you? Oh, you're anxious, right? Hey, try this. Or you need some confidence, sure. And so that can be people all around the world that would never have had access to me normally can get it for next to nothing. And so that's, I think, going to be that's where I don't have the rigid goals that I used to. I'm much more of a direction guy these days, right? So I see, when I look into my timeline, I see me healthy, happy, and successful. My wife, my family, friends. I see certain projects I know that I'm doing. But generally, it's about, for me, this is the interesting thing, Anne, is that if you look at the happiness levels, right, they're about the same as they were in the 1940s. Yet, we're living longer, we're richer, we've got more freedoms, we're healthier. So what's happened? Well, I think we've confused pleasure with happiness. Pleasure is a glass of champagne, it's buying a new handbag or a sports car. It's like, happiness is when you live your values. When you, my values, if I can tick the box going, do I feel healthy today? Yes. Do I feel loved? Did I laugh today? Did I find amusement and enjoyment? Did I do something kind? Did I do something creative? If I can tick those boxes every day, then my life is good. And that's kind of how I live these days.
Thank you. I want to ask you more things, but our time is up. I can't thank you enough for coming to our weird event. It means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to and you've inspired a lot of the people that are here today. A lot of people are in this field because of you today, directly or indirectly, and thank you for that. Thank you for that contribution.
Sure.
Everybody, the one and only. This evening, he's travelling. He is going to hang around for a short period of time. If you manage to grab some time with him, don't hold him, please.